Hello, this is Leslie, and you're listening to the interview with Leslie Heaney. I am so excited to introduce you to my next guest, Nicholas Fox Weber. Nick and I met in a hiking trip in Italy and became fast friends. He is an art historian, the author of 14 books. He's also been the executive director of the Josef and Annie Albers Foundation for 4 decades. And he is a founder, supporter, booster, really everything for this organization based in Senegal called the Korsa. You know, I admire Nick so much. We all see things in life that we wish we could change or people that we'd like to help. Yet really, it's kind of the rare among us that actually does something about it. And Nick is one of those people. After a trip to Senegal with a doctor about 20 years ago, he saw communities and villages there that needed access to healthcare, to education, really to basic amenities. And he has worked tirelessly since then to help support those clinics, those schools, those organizations throughout Senegal. My son, John, who was 13 at the time, visited Senegal with Nick back in February of 2023 and got to see his incredible work and the work of the Korsa firsthand. So in this episode, Nick and I talk about his work in Senegal, how and why he got started, and just more about his spectacular and inspirational life as an art historian and as an author, but most importantly, as a humanitarian. I think it's just the kind of conversation and inspiration that's so relevant this holiday season. So without further ado, here is Nicholas Fox Weber. Well, I'm so thrilled to see you. For listeners, Nick and I are old friends. We met on a hiking trip in Italy, and you were my hiking partner. So we got to spend a lot of time together, and I learned all about Nick and his incredible and fascinating life. And will you just for listeners, take us, Nick, to kind of explain a little bit how you came to Paris and then when you first learned about what was going on in Senegal?
Absolutely, Leslie. Well, I've for many years directed the Josef and Annie Albers Foundation. They were 2 great artists at the Bauhaus School in Germany who emigrated to America in the 30s. And Annie Albers, who was a brilliant weaver, used to say, you can go anywhere from anywhere. And I feel that my life somehow exemplifies that, because one thing led to another. And you asked how I went to Paris. I'd been traveling there quite a bit over the years for my writing. I'd written books on various French subjects, including the children's books about Babar and the artist Balthus. And then in 1999, I began to write the biography of the architect Le Corbusier, which required my going to Paris. And I also needed to go there because we were doing an Annie Albers show at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs. And my younger daughter, terribly bright, was not really doing very well in high school. She clearly needed a change of scene or something. So my wife and I decided that Charlotte would enroll in a school in Paris, and we would see how that went, with the idea that it would be for 6 months, and I would begin my research, and then we would return home. And in little time, we discovered that we were both flourishing. We decided to move from a sublet apartment to our own apartment, and Charlotte was doing so well in school that that was the answer for her. And as we settled in there, and this is an example of how you can go anywhere from anywhere, Charlotte, at first, she was in a local bilingual school, and it wasn't working out after day 1. And I panicked as a parent and thought, how could I put my kid in the wrong school? 16 is such an important age. And I looked in the yellow pages. It's in the old days before you could Google everything. Yeah. And the yellow pages was how you found things. And I looked up international schools, and I waited until the first possible moment in the day when someone would answer the phone, and I called the International School of Paris. And by 10 o'clock that morning, Charlotte was enrolled in this wonderful school.
That's
So
amazing.
a few months later, I needed a dermatologist. Charlotte was going to our family dermatologist, and I thought, it isn't really tactful to go to the same dermatologist as your teenage child. It seems sort of claustrophobia making. And so I turned to the Yellow Pages. This seemed to be the way that I
It's your go-to. It's your go-to.
found things in life.
Yeah.
And I saw that there was a dermatologist named Gilles de Gois. And I thought, well, you can't have a more French name than Gilles de Gois. That'll be very good for my French. And his office was a bike ride away. So I thought, fine, I'll go to him. And I went to Dr. de Gois, and I speak French with a strong American accent. But he asked me several questions and then told me that he had founded an organization that provided medical care in Senegal, and that there were a group of doctors in Paris who, on an entirely voluntary basis, went to Senegal 3 or 4 times a year on sort of a mission to provide medical care and to support local medical centers there. And they were engaged in a range of projects. And Leslie, I don't know why, but I said to him in my Connecticut accented French, Je voudrais bien y aller avec vous, monsieur. I'd like to go there with you. And 6 weeks later, I had purchased 2 new duffel bags, one of which had my things, and he told me to arrive with an empty duffel bag, which I filled with toothbrushes and toothpaste for 250 kids at a school in the Senegalese city of Thiès, because Dr. Dubois' organization called Le Kinkaliba had provided them with running water. They had never had running water at this school. And running water.
And Nick, give me a time frame for this. Is this 25 years ago?
Yeah, this is still, I went in 1999, and this is now 2002 by the time that I got to Senegal. And the girls at the school now had an opportunity to brush their teeth, which they'd never been able to do without running water. And so we gave toothbrushes, and Dr. Dubois, in his duffel bag, had blood, a supply of blood that was needed at Tambacounda Hospital. There was a blood shortage, and as a doctor, he was able to transport blood, which is a tricky business, through customs.
I was going to ask you about blood through customs. Sounds like that. You would need to have a special visa for that or something.
Absolutely. A highly qualified doctor, though, and he was okay to do it. And what struck me, Leslie, was this is amazing. We all want to do things in life that make a difference. And sometimes you think, what really is going to help other people? And you can go to an expensive charity benefit and sit there and everyone feels rather good about himself, but then you can wonder, did the money really go to the purpose I had in mind, or what is this doing? And when I saw that one could deliver blood, one could deliver toothbrushes, and that Dr. Dubois and his colleagues had built amazing small medical centers and were in the process of developing another medical center, and that they had created sort of like a campus for high school girls. You have been there, called the Foyer de Tambacounda, and they built this campus so that young women, rather than being forced into early marriage in their villages or being made to have children starting at the age of 12 or 13, could go to the foyer, live beautifully, attend the local high school, and control their own destinies. And I thought this was fantastic. If we're going to have an impact on the world, what more can we do than to enable young women whose lives would otherwise not really be their own to control, but enable them to pursue their education and eventually go into leadership roles for the world.
Well, I think, Nick, the thing that struck me so much about this story and this experience when you first told me about it was that a lot of us see things that they wish were different, right? You see someone who's homeless on the street, or you see other need in the world, and you think, oh gosh, that's terrible. I hope somebody will do something, or I wish something could be done for that person
Yes.
or that organization. And so few of us say, I want to go see what you've done, and I want to see how I can help, or buy the second duffel bag and fill it with the toothbrushes and the toothpaste. And so it was such an inspiration to me to hear your story that when I said to you, Nick, will you come on the podcast? The reason why is because I just think other people and listeners and need to, be inspired in that way, because it is as simple, really, as just taking that first step, right? You took that first step and you went on that trip. And I think you told me when you went with the doctor, there were no real roads, right? There's really only one main paved road there now.
Everything was extremely simple. And where we stayed was certainly, it was adequate, but it certainly was not cushy. For many years, the lodge we stayed in only had electricity running for 4 hours every morning. And otherwise, you just toughed it out. And I found it very exciting from the word go to realize that I was with people whom I would describe as fairly privileged, able to live pretty much as they wanted. They were men and women about my age or older. If they had wanted to, they could have just been living in luxurious apartments in Nice and enjoying the sunny weather and not bothering themselves to do anything different. And yet these people had made the choice to use their free time and their own funding to go to an area of Africa where the needs are enormous and to roll up their sleeves and really make life better for people. And I was terribly impressed by it.
When you mentioned, you said a country in Africa with great needs, I thought it might be helpful to just give a little background on Senegal itself. Listeners probably know it's in West Africa, but size of the country, what is the economy sort of based on, religion, things like that?
By all means, Senegal is a relatively small African country on the west coast. It's about the size of Ireland. It lines up geographically with Ireland. If you were to draw a straight line up the map from Dakar to the points of County Kerry, it was settled by the French. Its population is largely Muslim. One of the very unusual things about it is that the Muslim and Christian communities get along absolutely harmoniously. There are people who work together from both religions, and it's quite wonderful to behold a lack of tension in an area where there's often tension. Senegal was an early democracy. Its first prime minister was a remarkable man named Léopold Senghor, who was a poet and one of the first artists or poets to become a head of state. And it's a very welcoming country and a very easy one to be in. I knew nothing about it when I started to go there. I don't think I could have told you where Senegal was on the map. I knew that it was in Africa, very little beyond that. I didn't realize that there are many different languages spoken there, Wolof and Pulaar being the main ones. It's not a particularly scenic country, except for certain areas. And I think that's an important point. We don't go there because it's, oh, so beautiful, you have to see the landscape. We go there because in a rather flat desert landscape, it's the real world. There are millions of people there who need things and who are, in a sense, quite isolated.
So you have this experience, you go with the doctor for your first time, you see how just by bringing the blood, by bringing the toothpaste and the toothbrushes, that you're making a direct impact, right? You're seeing what
Yes.
how you can make a difference just right there by taking those just small steps or big steps. You go back to Paris, and then how do you get more involved in the organization when you get back?
For many years, I've been running the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation, as I mentioned, and I went back and asked my fellow trustees of the foundation if we could offer some financial support for the work in Senegal. And I thought, Dr. Dubois is doing such a great job, we should be able to get him some American money. And also, it was just my instinct. On that first trip, I was in a hospital in Tambacounda. You've been in that hospital. And at that point, the only surgical bed was broken. It was wretched. It had broken legs. You couldn't adjust anything. And it was the only place to perform surgery. And I, coming from a world that has access to many things, said in my blithe way, "Oh, I'm sure that we can get you a new surgical bed." Thinking that back in Connecticut, where I was living, or in Paris, where I now had friends, or in Ireland, where I have a house, I would find a doctor, a hospital, someone who would have an old surgical bed. And I was brought up very few rules, but one of them was if you say you're going to do something, you have to do it. And I felt absolutely terrible. I could not locate a used surgical table or the equivalent. And it took me 11 years. But finally, I was able to fulfill that promise after I discovered an organization in America called Project Cure. And Project Cure takes used hospital equipment and medical supplies and sends them to places in the world where they are needed. And the deal with Project Cure is that they'll send the supplies if you will pay the transport. By then, in the course of 11 years, I had created the organization that was initially the American Friends of La Quinqueliba to support Dr. Dubois' organization. Then his organization eventually disbanded, but we had now created a really active support group. We changed the name to La Korsa, which is the word in Pular for love with respect. And we had many supporters and now had become fairly active. And Project Cure, I discovered, would deliver $500,000 worth of medical equipment if we in turn would pay for shipping and for building a container, which would be a total cost of about $30,000. That seemed like a reasonable deal. And we went with a representative of Project Cure, a volunteer doctor who checked out sites all over the world to see if they qualified for receiving equipment from Project Cure. And they were checking to see if the work in Senegal warranted one container. And they ended up deciding that the needs were so major, so substantial, that it merited 3 containers. And so within a year or two, lots of medical equipment went to Tambacounda Hospital, and they got those surgical beds, and they got a great deal more.
And I've seen all of that equipment, that new equipment for the hospital, which is, as you said, used equipment, but what a terrific thing, and what a terrific way to take that organization and what they're able to provide and what they're offering and make such a substantial difference for the lives of the people in Senegal. The other thing that I'll say that you've done, which I think is just so creative and so special, is that you've married your interest and your passion and your expertise in art and architecture and art history in your projects in Senegal. So that hospital has been sort of added to, and you had a very well-known architect come and create a waiting room, because before there was not a waiting room. People would just sort of gather outside of the hospital while their loved ones were being cared for in the hospital, because Senegalese, it's not like America where, you drop somebody off or one person goes in with you. Because people come from such far distances, everybody comes, right? I think I'm getting that right, Nick. You know much better than I. And so it's just such a beautiful and cool looking, for lack of a better word, hospital. Tell us about that piece. And you did the same thing with the school as well.
I've been very fortunate to be exposed to great art and architecture since I was quite young. And it seems that there's no reason to build ordinary, industrial, unappealing buildings. It could be just as easy to build something beautiful. And our first project in Senegal, where we were able to build something wonderful, was an artist's retreat, which we called Thread, in a village called Sintian, where we had a medical center. And because I tend to talk to anyone who's willing to listen about this work in Senegal, I'm pretty passionate about it. I had met a wonderful architect named Toshiko Mori, who had worked on an Albert show in New York. And when I talked to her about Senegal, she was so excited that she made the project for an artist's retreat the subject of a seminar for her students in the Harvard Graduate School of Architecture. And eventually, one of the students came up with such a good design that Toshiko reworked, that we built this beautiful artist's retreat. Then we were asked to build a school in a Muslim village. And again, Toshiko came up with an extraordinary design. And this work has been published all over the world and won many prizes and so on, because it's really an unusual example of wonderful building in a difficult climate using local materials and at relatively little financial expenditure. When we decided to build the pediatric and maternity units of a hospital, I thought, well, it's time again for a great architect. And Toshiko felt that she had already done enough projects that someone else should be given the opportunity. And we set up a competition. We got names from every possible source. And it was a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York who recommended a Swiss architect named Manuel Hertz. And Manuel Hertz said he wouldn't come up with a design until he had gone to the city of Tambacounda, where we were building these hospital buildings, and looked at everything there and then come up with a design. And so he built these extraordinary structures that you saw.
Well, one of the challenges, if I recall, for that architect and that design was trying to keep, there's a lot of dust.
Yes.
Right? And so they were trying to figure out how to keep it in some spaces open air so that you didn't have to have temperature control in all of the different areas, but have it be designed in such a way that you were keeping dust out of operating rooms and treatment rooms.
That's exactly right. It's a climate that's terribly hot, up to 110 degrees Fahrenheit a good part of the time, and can be very windy, which brings in desert sands. Leslie, I'm struck that doing a podcast, one can almost hear the smiles in people's voices. And speaking with you, with so much of this conversation. I see your smile, which conveys a sense of the really wonderful things that you've seen in Senegal. And I'm struck by this notion that you can go anywhere from anywhere, the way that you and I met, which, as you said, was hiking on trails not too far from Rome, part of sort of a fitness retreat. And we started talking, and many people voice polite interest in something, but you went much further. You not only were interested, but you decided to go to Senegal yourself, that it sounded like such a worthwhile project. And you brought along your son, John, who at the trip, I'm not sure whether he was 12 or 13 at the time of the trip.
He was just 13, yeah.
He had just turned 13. And he, at age 13, closely observed aspects of life in Senegal, and he took it upon himself to do something. So it was remarkable. We went to a medical center in a place called Ouagadougou, and we saw that the only ambulance was just a pathetic vehicle in terrible condition, hardly able to deal with the difficult roads there. And there was a crying need for an ambulance. And John decided that he wanted to raise the money for an ambulance that could go to villages, very remote, pick up patients and bring them into the medical center. Now, one pictures the sort of ambulance we know here in America, but in fact, an ambulance in Senegal is a refit pickup truck that can deal with the terrain, and where the back of the truck is made into an acceptable place for a patient for his or her transport. And John, in the course of a year, managed to raise over $35,000, working with his friends at his school, going to family friends, and being incredibly resourceful. And for me, it's just a remarkable story of how someone with compassion and energy and brought up with good values can make such a difference in the world at a young age.
Well, Nick, that's so kind of you, and you're getting me verklempt over here at the table, but truly, it's your inspiration, and I wish everybody who's listening could go, and actually anyone who's listening that wants to, I'm sure Nick would be happy to take you
Yes.
to go see all the incredible work that he's doing in Senegal, that his organization is doing, because I think when you see these tangible, achievable, for Americans, ways that we can help. It struck me in one of the villages, they built you mentioned the girls, when you went for the first time, girls brushing their teeth with the running water, right, that they had installed a well there. And we saw a new well that had been put in this village, and watching the ripple effect of just that one project and what it had done for this village, from allowing them to not only have clean and running, fresh water, but to let them have a community garden and have ways to water their animals and have livestock. It just absolutely transformed a village. And I asked someone who was with us on the trip, I said, so what is the cost of installing a new well or drilling a new well? And it's about $10,000. And when you see the impact that can have on so many people's lives and transform people's lives, it's very inspiring. It's very inspiring. And seeing that just how these small acts or small gestures for us, from where we're coming from as Americans in a country that has such great resources, seeing how having those simple access to what we sort of take for granted here, and what a transformative thing that can be for people in other countries, particularly Senegal. It's very inspirational. And I think, the more people who are aware of it and see ways in which they can make a difference and they can get involved. The other thing that you did that I thought was just so extraordinary, and I don't think I realized it before we went, but you talked about the girl boarding school, but there was a school that, and I think it might have been the same village, where boys had traditionally been allowed to go to school, but girls were not. And you went and brokered that deal, really, that nobody thought you'd be able to do, which is with the caliph, to get the caliph, who's the religious leader in that area, to give you the green light to allow girls to go to school there.
You're absolutely right. It was remarkable. We came to know a very remote village on the far side of the Gambia River that one reached in a dugout canoe.
Yep.
And the village chief was very pleased with a small medical center where we had built a maternity unit. And we had also provided a generator for electricity and running water, absolutely essential for a medical center.
Yep.
And we then learned from the village chief that he wanted a school. But we were so excited with the medical center, and as I said, the village chief said they needed a school. There was no school. Basically, everyone in the community was illiterate. They could speak Quranic Arabic and read Quranic Arabic, but that's not the same as everyday Arabic, and they have access to no other language. And so I decided we should try to build a school, but that required the approval of, as you said, the caliph, the chieftain of the entire region. And at first, he was not in favor of the idea. I had met with him, and I had said in French, which was translated into Pular, that we wanted to build a school for girls and boys. They needed a school for about 220 people. And he said in French, il faut en réfléchir. We have to think about it. And I thought that would be a no. But with a local doctor, I really stayed after the caliph. I arranged to meet him a second time in France. And Leslie, this man, a religious leader, struck me, and I may be naive, but as one of the most compassionate, caring human beings I've ever encountered. When I spoke with him about the kids and our hope that they would learn not just the usual academic subjects, but be trained in agriculture and fishing, the villages on a river, he was deeply interested. And finally, he agreed. And indeed, we built a school where now 220 children, boys and girls, are learning to read and write in French and Arabic, and some in English. And it's game-changing. People from other villages want to go there, send their children there, and so on.
It's incredible. And I remember we went to go, when we were there visiting with you, to go have an audience with the caliph.
Yes.
And that was quite a ceremony, right? I don't think we have any equivalent in the United States. A bishop wouldn't cut it, or even a cardinal wouldn't.
Yeah.
I don't know what the equivalent was. It's almost sort of like a combined government leader and religious leader.
Exactly.
Maybe more of a pope, a medieval pope kind of a figure. And it had that sort of pageantry to it, to have an audience with him. And you wanted to meet with him, and he wanted to see you to get an update on how things were going with the school. And all of your colleagues in France, from what I recall, were just sort of said to you, there's no way he's ever going to agree to allow girls to go to school. And somehow your argument, your persistence, and your charm, Nick, got him to agree to do that. And he said to you in that meeting, I think, that he's actually quite pleased that, he's come around and sees the benefit of girls knowing how to read and being educated in the village, and seeing the impact that can have.
You describe it so nicely. Indeed, that was a wonderful visit that we had with the Caliph in the village of Medina Gunas, in a setting which was almost like a temple in its feeling. And I remember one visit with the Caliph when, as a mark of our friendship, he gave me a live goat.
Oh, right. I forgot about this.
That was a little bit difficult to deal with. I wanted to be careful, but I couldn't imagine taking a goat either back to France or on to America, even though my grandson, who was on that trip, was there then about 5 years old, was terribly eager for me to keep the goat. But that wasn't possible. The goat is now in a field near the village of Sintian. And the rapport with the Caliph would give you just great, great faith in humanity. The idea that people from so many different walks of life can be deeply caring about the well-being of children, giving children access to the future, and so on.
So I think, people have said this to me, and I think we're all, so many of us want to get involved with different causes and want to support so many important projects that are happening both in the U.S. and abroad. Some people will say to me, oh gosh, why should we be investing or be interested in what's happening in Africa when there's so many problems and causes here at home? What would be your response to a comment like that?
Well, we want to make a difference where we can. And when we've encountered need, our natural tendency is to try to help. And I treat the Korsa in many ways as if I'm dealing with an extended family. And if some of my family members live 4,000 miles away, I'm still going to care about them as if they're family members. Truth is that there is so much to be done in the United States, so much to be done at home, as you say, which I completely support and am fond of. But we can do a great deal in rural Africa for significantly less money, for one thing. I don't have the means to have helped finance buildings at a hospital in New York. And fortunately, there are people who will help with that. And when you know of a need somewhere, it just becomes very hard to resist.
I think that's right. And I think for me, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, just seeing the impact that, small projects can have such a huge impact there and really transform people's lives. $2,000 can truly transform hundreds of people's lives. I mean, with those wells, for example, people were coming 4 and 5 hours a day, with a donkey and a cart to go fill up cans, big jugs with water to bring back to their village. Okay, so for people that are listening and, who have been inspired by you, because I'm so inspired by you, and I know anyone else who listens to you will be as well, and they see something and they want to do something, where would you tell them to start? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would suggest very specifically, and I'm smiling as I say this, but that they familiarize themselves with Le Korsa, that they go to our website and develop at least some knowledge of what it is that we're doing. And my hope would be that they would see something that we're doing which strikes them as particularly worthwhile. Could be something like that ambulance, which your son has made possible and which serves such purposes. It could be something like the facility that enables women to pursue their futures. It could be our Women's Health Center in Dakar, where women of very limited financial means get great prenatal care, which is just so vitally important, and that they decide what it is that interests them. We are very receptive to people being in touch, letting us know if they have any interest in helping, whether it's rolling up their sleeves and being there or contributing financially.
Well, next time you have one of those trips, Nick, where you're bringing over people on your board or journalists. So you had someone who was from the Yale Art Museum who was going on the trip that I was on. Just direct message me and I can connect you with Nick to go on one of these incredible trips to see firsthand what a difference he's making. Okay, on a totally unrelated topic, when you're not doing all the incredible work that you're doing with La Korsa, you are a writer, an art historian, and you've just written another book that's just come out about Mondrian. It's about his life, his art. The title is Mondrian, His Life, His Art, His Quest for the Absolute. What number book is this for you, is my first question. And then tell us a little bit about the book and why you decided to write about him.
Well, it's my 15th book, and I decided to write about him because I'd written some biographies of significant artists and reached a point in life when I thought I had one more really big biography in me. It takes about 10 or 12 years to go from the initial research to the final book. And I was speaking with the director of the Tate Museum in London, who has been a nice reader of my work. And I asked him who was left of the great masters of the 20th century where there was no biography. And he named the artists Leger and Mondrian. And I told him that when I was 10 years old, my mother had had a painting at an exhibition in a museum in Hartford, Connecticut, the wonderful Wadsworth Athenaeum. And I had gone to the opening of the exhibition and was very restless. A 10-year-old doesn't love being the only child with hundreds of people and eating absolutely repugnant crustless tea sandwiches. And I asked my father if I could wander, and I went upstairs, and I came downstairs after 15 minutes, and I said, "Daddy, you've got to come up with me. There's something I love the way I love mountaintops and skiing." And Dad went upstairs with me, and we looked at a very simple painting, basically a vivid blue rectangle surrounded by a black grid and a white background. And my father said, "Well, very good, Nicky. That's by an artist called Mondrian. Mommy and I have a book about his work at home." And it was the beginning. And I'm at the stage in life,
Wow,
Leslie, where it's related to the work for La Korsa. I feel that I've had some good luck, and I want other people to have some of the same fortune. And part of my fortune is being able to enjoy art by someone like Mondrian. And the book has given me a chance to explore his motives, his personality, and possibly to understand why it is that his art can be so extraordinary for people to look at. Mondrian became so popular that his paintings became the best basis of dress designs by Yves Saint Laurent, Pierre Cardin. They've become the basis of building facades, and they're very beautiful to look at. And it was a chance for me to explore him and the qualities of his art.
So I know that the next thing for you right now is a tennis game that I'm maybe keeping you from. You've got about 10 minutes, I think, to get there. But what is next for you? I mean, what is there another book that's next? What's next for La Korsa?
There are two books in the works. I've recently written a biography of Annie Albers, which I've now handed in. It's scheduled to be published by Yale University Press. And fittingly, because of my schedule today, I have another book which is supposed to come out next year, which is called The Art of Tennis. It makes links between art, ballet, fashion, music, and tennis. Talks about tennis as an art in itself, and recounts stories of certain rather fabulous tennis players where I'd like people like your son and my grandchildren to know who they were. So there are profiles of certain great tennis players from the past, like the man with the wonderful name of Bunny Austin, who broke the boundary so that people could wear shorts at Wimbledon. The wonderful Althea Gibson, who was the first Black player at the U.S. Open in Forest Hills. And I tell their stories and have the great joy about writing about tennis.
Oh, I can't, the next book after that you need to write is your own autobiography, because you've just led the most extraordinary, fascinating, and inspiring life, Nick. And I'm so inspired by all the work that you do. And I know others that listen to you and learn more about you and the Korsa will feel the same.
Well, you're so lovely and encouraging. You have such a gift for making one actually feel quite good about what one felt and conveying the value of things. Your responsiveness is a beautiful quality.
Oh, thank you, Nick. Well, I'm so happy to see you. I wish we were doing this in person, but I'm glad I got to see you by Zoom for an hour.
Yes.
And I have to go back and book our next trip and bring the rest of the kids over to see all the incredible work that you're doing over there. And
that would be fabulous.
Or dinner in Paris. We've got to get some plans on the books.
I'm
for sure.
all for that. And you bet.
Oh, so great to see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to see you.
That brings us to the end of this episode of The Interview. A huge thank you again to Nicholas Fox Weber for joining. And as always, thank you all so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. We release a new episode every Wednesday. And until then, this is Leslie, and thank you for joining The Interview.